Welcome to Wake Up and Teach by Kelly Education, where we uncover inspiring stories and strategies for reimagining our nation's education workforce.
Hello, I'm Nicola Soares, President of Kelly Education, and welcome back to Wake Up and Teach, your front row seat to the future of the education workforce. Today, we're tackling a critical issue for district and school leaders everywhere: how to build a supportive work environment that not only attracts but also engages and retains the top talent essential for driving student success. Joining me is Amy Bouque, Chief People Officer at Kelly. Together, we'll explore the 6 elements of people success, a proven framework for fostering purpose, growth, clarity, well-being, empowerment, and connection in your workforce. Amy will share practical strategies for district and school leaders to build a more resilient, engaged team and discuss why it's not enough to focus solely on purpose, even in a field as meaningful as education. So whether you're an administrator, educator, or simply passionate about the future of education, this conversation will provide you with insights and actionable ideas to move the needle in your district or school. Let's get started. Amy, welcome to the show.
It is my absolute pleasure to be here with you, Nikki.
All right. So Amy, tell us, so as Chief People Officer for Kelly, and of course, you're always working around our workforce challenges, our strategies, and just making us overall as an organization better. Tell me how your role specifically and your perspective on work challenges, what do you do to influence that? What's your perspective on those things?
Thank you for asking, Nikki. As Kelly's Chief People Officer, Kelly, a leading global staffing and solutions workforce company, I oversee the development and execution of strategies that empower both of our internal workforce, our Kelly people, and the talent we place on assignment each and every day across a variety of industries and a tremendous number of educational settings. My role gives me a really unique perspective and a vantage point that looks at workforce dynamics, trends in talent acquisition, retention, and the evolving expectations of employees, especially post-pandemic.
It's a huge role, and I know that your influence is really felt throughout our organization. One of the things that I'm often curious about to learn further, you talk about the big picture behind the 6 elements of people's success. And I was just curious if you can kind of just explain each of the elements and where, I'd like to kind of go further into the discussion of where you think some of those elements can really resonate with public school districts or schools, especially this moment in time.
Absolutely. Let me do just a little bit of a setup, Nikki, if I could, which is to explain that, one of the ways in which we keep a pulse on our employee perspective on how they're experiencing their world of work through Kelly is through the utilization of a listening tool powered by Glint. Glint serves over 1,300 companies. They have over 10 million respondents in their databases, and that results in like 325 million or so data points. And of their questions, they have 198 that are benchmarked. You and I have been talking about these sort of 6 sort of core elements of people's success because we believe that those are some of the biggest drivers of employee satisfaction and employee engagement. And so the 6 that I'd love to share today is, purpose, growth, clarity, well-being, empowerment, and connection. In each of those, we have evidence, empirical evidence from all of this data from Glint that tells us that these are sort of proven drivers of engagement and happiness at work.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And it's interesting because being in the profession that I'm in terms of leading our education division, and certainly we work with literally hundreds, if not thousands, public school districts and schools. Certainly public school districts as a whole organization are very purpose-driven. But I do think that some of these elements certainly resonate. There are 2 in particular that I think are interesting to talk about a little bit further. So well-being. Well-being is often overlooked in very stressful professions. We know that teaching is. Based on your experience, though, in the business sector, how can districts and schools better address safety, wellness, and equitable treatment of their staff?
Absolutely. It's a great question. And To your point, well-being is fundamental to sustain performance, especially in high stress professions like teaching. In the business world, we're seeing the prioritization of employee wellness and well-being leads to better engagement, retention, overall success. And we know that those same principles apply in the education settings as well. And as you ask the question, things I think about are this notion of safety, both the physical safety, but also the psychological safety are critical. Sort of district leaders ensuring that the classrooms and the school facilities are secure, while also fostering a culture where staff feel safe to express their opinions. They're allowed to share concerns and seek support, that there are clear protocols for them to create spaces to talk about what might be potentially, previously untouchable is really important. Wellness programs is another great opportunity for schools to consider. Things like mental health counseling and stress management workshop and fitness challenges, ensuring, like Kelly does and many corporations do, that there's an employee assistance program available. And not only is it available, but it's talked about often and counselors are brought in so that they can see sort of the tangible impact of, this really terrific benefit and what it could do for de-escalating, sort of short-term emergent or urgent issues. And then the thing I would, encourage leaders to think about is making sure that in the well-being piece, they're also thinking about decision-making, professional development, pay structures, recognition program. This idea of, sort of fair treatment matters for the emotional well-being, for the overall well-being of their staff.
That's amazing. And I know that we internally have our own examples. Do you know any companies too that are doing some very unique things in terms of well-beings and some of the programming that they're doing for their employees? Anything that you would like to share that might give sort of ideas, especially with our stakeholders within schools and public school districts?
Yeah. Well, maybe one that we could talk about that connects something that Kelly does and also big giants like Microsoft does, right? So one that comes immediately to mind is this idea of mental health days. Within Kelly, that we reshaped our sick day bank to be a well-being and sick day, mental health, well-being and sick day bank. And it's recognizing that sometimes that my inability to be successful at work may not be a physical ailment. It may be that I am mentally unwell. And you're creating, just by offering that, you're creating a space for an employee to say, things aren't okay. And that there's a space for them to sort of secure that benefit. And Microsoft does the same. They offer, mental health leaves and care, and they're creating, sort of transparency within their leaders to talk openly about mental health. And other organizations that I think about, like J&J, I know they do a lot around physical health challenges, completion of mental health resilience or mental resilience programs. So, within Kelly, we offer the Calm app, and we've got some challenges there for employees to create so many hours of meditation or mindfulness and, some of those investments. It's just a way to try to create like those small habits and the benefit of those small habits adding up. And then maybe the last one I'll offer is, I believe Salesforce has this gratitude culture, and they have, like Kelly, volunteer time off. They also have program offerings like mindfulness spaces where, like, on their floors, like in person, they have spaces where they can have meditation and yoga practices, as I've read about. Those are three sort of giants that I'd offer, but also organizations like Kelly are putting those things in practice in smaller, maybe more discreet ways.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I know I'm a beneficiary of the Calm app. So thank you very much for some of those unique programs that we do. One of the other elements that I think is really interesting to talk about too is empowerment. Empowerment is about trust and autonomy, as we both know. Why is this element particularly challenging for leaders in all workplaces?
I think there's some generational sort of issues, but for me, when I think about it, this idea of empowerment hinges on two critical components: trust and autonomy. And for me, you've heard me talk, Nikki, about Rachel Botsman's work on trust, and she defines trust as a confident relationship with the unknown. That's not necessarily the leaders of past, right? So I remember in the 80s and 90s, I worked in manufacturing, and the facilities lead had a big plaque in his office that said, "To trust is to check." And you're like, as opposed to, no, I know you know what good looks like, and I believe in you. I trust you. And this idea that we have leaders who believe in each other's capabilities, that the school principals and superintendents believe in the capabilities of their teachers. They believe in their intentions and in their decisions in such a way that even when outcomes become uncertain, or even when there's a question on the table around a behavior or an action, an incident, that the leaders are approaching the incident with curiosity and openness and a willingness to ensure that the perspective of the teacher is assumed positive until otherwise proven. And what a difference in those moments that hinges on that teacher, that employee's experience when they believe like that the assumption is positive until otherwise sort of decisioned. You know that, right? How different that feels when your leader sort of says, help me understand. Tell me more about this. Share with me your perspective. How different that is.
I'm curious from your perspective, do you think that the sense of empowerment changed, especially as, schools, educators went through the pandemic and how we've come out of that now? Do you think that there's been, what's your sense in terms of sort of the negative or the positive impacts of that?
Yeah, I do think they did. I think there's probably a pendulum that swung, Nikki, if I think about it. This idea that in the early days of the pandemic, nobody knew what they were doing. There was no rule book for you, me, or any of us in those windows, let alone, as superintendents and school districts that were and teachers who were trying so hard to keep, young people safe and trying to make the right decisions around the pedagogical decision making. But what I saw and heard both from my network, my husband's an educator, my best friend's a retired educator, my sister's an educator. What I heard them talking about and seeing was how much autonomy they were given from their leaders at the time of the early days of the pandemic. Like they co-created together, and how powerful and empowering that was for them in those moments. And yet, unfortunately, when it was, I'll say, use air quotes, return to sort of the normalcy, there was sort of this reconstitution of control that impaired some of that creativity and autonomy and confidence of educators. And I would just invite leaders who are listening to the call to think about whether or not there's some repairing to be done around, you are the expert. I trust you. I believe in you. Help me understand. What are you trying to accomplish? Are we looking for new and innovative ways of meeting our student needs, recognizing some of the degradation of capabilities given the pandemic impacts?
Right, right. That's incredibly powerful. And I want to sneak in another element here if I can, because this particular element is very near and dear to my heart. And it's certainly an element that I focus within my organization, and that's connection. And connection seems to be the glue that's holding teams together. We talk a lot about connections and mental health wellness programs for students and all sorts. But I often think, do we forget about our teachers, the head learners of the classroom? So why is this sense of belonging so critical for professionals such as teachers, do you think?
Oh, I think it's a great question. I think for each and every one of us humans, sort of moving through this world, this need to belong is vital to our being. But in a school setting, I think it's vital for school staff because it fosters collaboration, engagement, resilience. And when I think about an environment like the education setting, which is often marked by high stress, emotional investment, complex challenges, I believe that when educators have this sense of connection to their colleagues, to the school community, to their leaders, they are far better equipped to navigate these demands and contribute effectively to their shared mission of student success.
100%. So in that vein, are there any sort of actionable steps that you think that superintendents or a chief academic officer or even a board chair could take to improve that sense of connection for our teachers?
Yeah. So just, maybe just very quickly going back to an earlier comment, this idea of ensuring psychological safety in how a leader interacts with their head learner, their teacher, ensuring that they're encouraging staff to share ideas, to offer opposing perspectives, to co-create and collaborate together, I think is important. I think this idea of asking the educators to model what the behavior that the student needs. This idea of, sort of the teachers working together across their classrooms, helps to create a culture where students themselves feel safe. Like when they see the educators working together, they're seeing the bonding, they're seeing the connection. It influenced the broader school's climate, benefiting everyone in that education. And I also think collaborating on projects. I've seen it again through my personal lived experience with my family and friends that are educators. When they have an opportunity to work outside of their classroom, whether or not it's across buildings or across grades or across departments, like little sparks of joy, of new experiences, building enhanced networks, and just having a stronger sense of seeing yourself in a larger ecosystem, it has tremendous value.
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And some of the elements that you've kind of focused on today sort of strikes me. These are sort of low cost kinds of things, especially in light of where budgets are with public school districts or just schools in general are these days. So that's really good to know. I'm curious, being that we are a recruiting organization, if you will, how can hiring leaders or chief HR officers or directors of talent acquisition, how can they use the 6 elements framework to attract new candidates, especially into the teaching profession or the openings that many of our schools do have?
It's a great question. And these pillars, these elements that we're talking about, purpose, growth, clarity, well-being, empowerment, connection, they can be hallmarks under which leaders are conducting interviews. It can be hallmarks in the way in which leaders conduct meetings, right? Are they creating spaces for connection in their meetings? Like, are they starting meetings with a check-in? How's everybody doing, right? You and I both believe in the Brene Brown approaches to the world. And one of her high return practices that I believe in is just starting meetings with the question, like, give me the 2 words. How are you doing? 2 words. It takes 5 minutes. Start a meeting that way. You're interviewing somebody, ask them about a time when they worked collaboratively with other teachers to drive an outcome outside of their normal experience. Just listen for the educators who are committed to working across, right? Those are not common, typical questions, but they help to get a sense of who the person is. Asking other teachers to participate in the interview, making sure you get good mentorship and peer mentors assigned to new hires. Right? There are so many low cost, high impact. And for me, it comes down to habits, intention, repetition, and muscle building that allows then the culture to take root, right? The culture is a accumulation of thousands of small moments that builds the trust of the organization that can be broken hard and quick, but can be built sort of very purposefully, intentionally through those moments.
Yeah. Oh, I absolutely love that. That gives me chills. One last final question for you. So, if you were giving any sort of advice or just sort of last leave behind thoughts on terms of how instructional leaders, whether they're a building principal or a superintendent, can be successful, particularly with their workforce strategies, what sort of advice would you give, especially around the framework of the 6 elements for people's success?
I would encourage a comprehensive view that's, again, not high dollars, but a level of intention, right? Look at your policies, reread them with fresh eyes. Oftentimes, especially a district that has long roots in the community, may have legacy policies that just don't make sense anymore. And it doesn't take much to say to a team, hey, these don't make sense. Like, can you help us reframe them and do them in simple, straightforward, positive centered language? That's what we did at Kelly. This positive center, sort of assuming, sort of that good intention in the language and, sort of what can be done in that spaces. Think about communication. And if there is a perceived gap in the culture that's lived and experienced and what you want it to be, ensure that you have tools like engagement insight surveys, or that you do intentional listening sessions where you have skip level meetings or you create conversation spaces where you can connect and listen. And then finally, I would just make sure that even with limited dollars, you ask and you work together to find those ways to invest. Peer learning circles, mentor programs, cross training, cross departmental projects. Those are all very accessible, low cost options that allows an organization to grow and thrive together.
Yeah, I love that. So, Amy, we're almost at time. So I want to say thank you. And I bet the audience can tell why you're one of my very favorite colleagues. A lot of great information. So thank you for your insights today.
Oh, my absolute pleasure. Absolutely, Nikki, my pleasure.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Wake Up and Teach. A huge thank you to Amy Bouque for sharing her expertise and providing such practical strategies for implementing the 6 elements of people success in our districts and schools. If you're looking to attract and retain top talent while creating a fulfilling work environment for your team, remember the importance of balancing purpose with growth, clarity, well-being, empowerment, and connection. It's a holistic approach that can transform the education workforce. If you enjoyed today's episode, please be sure to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review. And to learn more about how Kelly Education can help your district succeed, visit us on the web at kellyeducation.com or connect with us on social media. Until next time, this is Nicola Soares reminding you to dream boldly, take action, and continue reimagining the future of education. See you on the next episode of Wake Up and Teach.
This podcast was produced in partnership with Amaze Media Labs.